The hum of the spaceship's engines was the only sound that filled the cockpit as Captain Ray sat in his seat, gazing out at the stars. His team was deep in space, tracking an unknown alien fleet that had been spotted heading toward Earth. Tension was thick, the kind that always came before an uncertain battle. Ray, a seasoned soldier, had fought against countless enemies, but the unknown was always the most dangerous. "Captain, we're approaching the target coordinates," his second-in-command, Lieutenant Carter, called out, breaking the silence. "All systems are green. Ready to engage when you give the word." Ray nodded, adjusting his seat harness. "Keep sharp. We don't know what we're dealing with yet." As the ship drifted into a dense asteroid field, Ray's eyes scanned the monitors. Suddenly, something caught his attention. An anomaly. It wasn't just a sensor glitch or a meteor. It was something unusual. A small, cloaked vessel, hidden in plain sight, drifting through the field. A quick check confirmed that it wasn't from any known alien race. "Scan it," Ray ordered. The crew worked quickly, running all diagnostic tools. The screen flickered, and for a moment, everything seemed normal. But then, a face appeared on the ship's main screen. It was a woman, alien yet unmistakably human in appearance. Her skin had a pale violet hue, and her long silver hair shimmered like starlight. Her eyes, though, were what captivated Ray the most. Deep, almost glowing with an unsettling mix of familiarity and sadness. "Do you remember me, human?" The woman's voice was calm, but there was something desperate in her tone, something that made Ray's heart race for reasons he couldn't explain. Ray's breath caught in his throat. He stared at her for a long moment, trying to make sense of her words. He had never seen this woman before in his life. His memories were full of combat missions, fleeting faces, and strange alien encounters. But this woman, she seemed to know him. "I'm sorry," Ray replied, his voice steady despite the unease creeping up his spine. "I don't know who you are." The woman's expression softened, but there was no relief in her eyes. She didn't seem surprised by his response. Instead, she seemed almost resigned. "You were there," she said softly, her gaze unwavering. "You don't remember, but we shared a moment. We were connected. A long time ago. Before everything changed." Ray's mind raced, trying to place her. The silence in the cockpit grew heavier, the air thick with the weight of her words. There was no doubt that she was important. And yet, nothing about her made sense. Why would she approach him now, after all these years? "I've seen you before. On Earth," she continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "You don't remember me, but I remember you. I've waited for this moment, for so long." The words felt like a weight pressing against Ray's chest. He could feel a strange tug in his mind, as if something buried deep within his memory was trying to surface. The woman was telling the truth. He could feel it, even if he couldn't place why. Something about her face, about her presence, stirred a feeling he couldn't explain. "Who are you?" Ray asked, his voice firmer now, the confusion turning into determination. "What do you want from me?" The woman's lips curled into a faint, melancholic smile. "My name is Astra," she said softly. "I was once part of the council that controlled the Dominion's secrets. I was there when it all began, when humanity was just a small speck on the galactic map. You helped me, helped save me from them." Her eyes locked onto his. "But they erased your memory, didn't they? You don't remember anything. Not me, not the reason we were together. You were made to forget." Ray shook his head, trying to piece it all together. He had heard rumors about memory manipulation, and he knew the Dominion, an ancient alien empire, had developed technology that could erase or alter memories. But he hadn't thought it was possible to do it so thoroughly. He leaned forward, his gaze intense. "Why now? Why contact me after all this time?" Astra's eyes softened, her voice barely a whisper. "Because the Dominion is coming for Earth again. And this time, they won't stop until every last human is under their control. I'm here because you have the key to stopping them. You were the only one who ever truly understood the threat they pose. You were the one who saw their true nature. Ray's heart pounded in his chest. The Dominion, the empire that had destroyed countless civilizations, that had ravaged planets without a second thought. He had always known the day would come when they'd return. But to hear that Astra was somehow tied to it, that she had a past with him, made everything feel personal. The stakes were higher now. "Help me," she pleaded, her voice trembling. "I can't do this alone. We have to stop them before it's too late." Ray felt a deep, almost magnetic pull toward her words, and yet a part of him resisted. He didn't remember her, and the danger she spoke of felt too real to ignore. But there was something else, something about her. It was as though a part of him recognized her, even if his mind had erased the memories. A long silence passed. Ray's fingers hovered over the controls as he weighed his options. The future of Earth, the safety of his crew, and his own sanity were on the line. If Astra was right, if the Dominion was really coming, they didn't have much time. "I'll help you," Ray finally said, his voice steady, but his mind still reeling. "But you're going to have to tell me everything." Astra nodded, a mixture of relief and sadness flooding her features. "I'll tell you everything. But first, we have to make sure they don't destroy everything before we even get the chance to fight back." As Ray prepared to face the unknown, one thing was clear. The journey ahead would test him in ways he couldn't yet comprehend. But something inside him told him Astra was right. They were connected in some way, and together, they would have to confront the greatest threat humanity had ever known. Ray felt the weight of Astra's words pressing down on him. The Dominion was coming back. The threat that he had always feared was real, and Astra, this mysterious alien woman, was somehow tied to it all. He tried to push aside the chaos swirling in his mind, but his thoughts kept returning to her face, to that pull he couldn't quite understand. What was she to him? Why was it so hard to shake the feeling that their destinies were somehow intertwined? As he sat in the cockpit, his fingers hesitated over the control panel. The stakes were higher now. Earth was in danger, and Astra was the key to stopping it. But there were so many questions left unanswered. He needed to know more, and he needed to know fast. "You said the Dominion won't stop until Earth is under their control," Ray said, breaking the silence. "But what exactly do they want with us? Why Earth?" Astra's expression darkened, and for a moment her eyes seemed to drift back into memories she wasn't ready to share. "The Dominion sees humanity as a threat," she began, her voice steady, but with an undercurrent of sadness. "They fear what you might become, your potential, your ability to resist. It's unlike anything they've encountered before. You're not like the other species they conquered. You fight. You don't just accept your fate. You push back." Ray's brow furrowed. "But we've been at war with them for years. If they were going to wipe us out, why haven't they done it already?" "They've tried," Astra answered, her voice growing quieter. "But the Dominion's technology is not infallible. They underestimated humans. They always have. And they didn't count on you, Ray." Ray leaned forward, his curiosity piqued. "Me? Why me?" Astra's gaze locked onto his, and for the first time since they had begun this conversation, there was a flicker of vulnerability in her eyes. "Because you were part of something you don't remember. A program designed to unlock humanity's hidden potential. It was supposed to make you the perfect soldier, more than just a human. You were engineered, Ray. You were made for this." The words hit Ray like a punch to the gut. He couldn't breathe for a moment. Engineered. What did she mean by that? He had always known that his training and abilities were extraordinary, but to hear that they weren't entirely natural, it felt like his entire life had been a lie. "Why don't I remember any of this?" Ray asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Why can't I remember what I was supposed to be?" Astra looked down, clearly torn. "The Dominion did it," she said quietly. "They erased your memories. They knew that you would be a threat to them if you remembered. They didn't want you to know your true purpose. They wanted you to be just another soldier, another weapon. But you're more than that. Ray, you're humanity's best hope. Ray's mind spun as he tried to process the enormity of what Astra was saying. He had been part of a program designed to enhance humanity's potential, a program that the Dominion feared, but they had erased his memories, his entire past, so he would be nothing more than a soldier in their war. He had been used, manipulated, and now, somehow, he was the key to stopping everything they had planned. But why contact me now? Ray asked, his voice trembling with a mix of disbelief and anger. Why not sooner? Why wait until the Dominion is already at our doorstep? Astra's expression softened, her eyes full of regret. I tried to reach you before, Ray, but the Dominion kept me hidden, kept me from contacting you. And then, when they saw you begin to remember, they silenced me. They erased my existence from your mind, too. You've been fighting them without knowing who you really are, without knowing that you were meant to stop them. The silence between them was thick, filled with the weight of Astra's revelations. Ray could feel his mind racing, his thoughts scattered like fragments of a shattered mirror. Everything he had known about his past, about his purpose, was being torn apart. The more he learned, the more questions seemed to arise. And yet, deep down, there was something inside him, some instinct, that told him Astra wasn't lying. The connection he felt to her, the strange recognition, it all made sense now. She had been there. She had known him. She had been part of his past, part of a mission far bigger than he had ever realized. Okay, Ray said, his voice steadying. I don't know what's real anymore, but I'll help you. I'll help stop the Dominion. Astra's eyes glistened with gratitude. You don't know how much this means, Ray. The battle ahead, it will test everything you've ever known. But you are not alone. You have me now, and together, we'll fight back. We'll reclaim what was taken from us. Ray took a deep breath, the weight of his decision sinking in. There was no turning back now. Whatever this was, whatever Astra had revealed, he had to face it head-on. Earth's future, humanity's future, depended on him. And though he still didn't remember all the details, he knew one thing for sure. Astra had been right. He wasn't just any soldier. He was something more, something that could make the difference in a fight that had already cost too many lives. Suddenly, the ship's alarm blared, snapping Ray out of his thoughts. The display flashed red as a large alien ship appeared on the radar. Astra's face turned pale, and Ray's heart skipped a beat. The Dominion had found them. We don't have much time, Astra said, her voice urgent. They're here. Ray clenched his fists, the weight of the moment finally settling in. He might not remember everything, but he knew what he had to do. The fight for humanity's survival had just begun. And this time, it wasn't just about fighting to win. It was about fighting to remember. The ship rocked violently as the alarm blared across the cockpit. Ray's heart raced. He had only just begun to wrap his head around Astra's revelations, and now the Dominion had found them. The red lights flashed urgently, a reminder that time was slipping away. The ship was being hunted, and if they didn't act fast, they would be destroyed. Ray's mind shifted gears immediately. He had trained for moments like this. Fast, decisive action. But this situation was different. This was not just about survival. It was about stopping the very force that threatened humanity's existence. The Dominion wasn't just some faceless enemy. It was a ruthless, technologically advanced force, and it had the power to crush entire civilizations. Astra's voice broke through his thoughts. Ray, we need to move. Now. If they're here, they won't hesitate to wipe us out. He turned to face her, his hand steady on the controls. Her face was pale, her hands clenched tight. I know, Ray said, his voice firm. But we're not going down without a fight. The ship's systems powered up, but the oppressive presence of the Dominion fleet loomed just outside. Astra's eyes narrowed as she studied the data. They've got us cornered. The AI controlling their ships is too advanced. We can't outmaneuver them without taking major damage. But there's another way. Ray's brow furrowed. What do you mean? We need to use the cloaking device. It's our only chance to survive the first wave, Astra said, glancing over her shoulder at the ship's control panel. It's risky, but it's our best shot. Ray's pulse quickened. The cloaking device was something they had barely tested. It could render their ship invisible to enemy radar, but it also drained the ship's power reserves. If they used it, they'd be left with very little energy to fight back. But there were no other options. Do it, Ray said. Activate the cloaking device. Astra nodded, and her hands flew over the controls. The hum of the ship changed as the cloaking system engaged, the walls of the cockpit flickering for a moment before everything went dark. A thin, transparent layer of energy surrounded the ship, and for a brief second, Ray felt the tension in the air dissipate. But it didn't last. The calm was shattered as a powerful shockwave rocked the ship. The cloaking device faltered, and the once invisible ship flickered back into view. The Dominion was too close. They had anticipated this move. We've been spotted, Astra shouted. Brace yourself. Ray slammed his fist against the console as enemy fire erupted from the Dominion ships. The blinding beams of plasma energy streaked across the dark expanse of space, hitting the shields and sending tremors through the hull. The ship shuddered violently, its systems warning of imminent structural failure. Ray gritted his teeth, hands tight on the control yoke. We can't keep dodging forever. We need to hit them back. Astra's gaze was intense. I know, but we're outgunned. Ray, their AI is controlling their ships with precision. They can predict our every move. He felt the weight of the situation bearing down on him. His instincts screamed at him to act, to do something, anything, but he couldn't afford to make a mistake. The AI they were up against was ruthless, designed to adapt to every tactic, every strategy. There had to be a way to outsmart it, to break through its control. Think, Ray muttered to himself, trying to push through the panic that was threatening to claw at him. And then it clicked. The one thing the AI couldn't predict was human unpredictability. Prepare to fire, Ray commanded, his voice steady despite the chaos surrounding him. We're going in close. Get ready to disable their weapon systems. Astra's eyes widened. Ray, no. If we get too close, we won't have a choice, Ray interrupted. We need to get in their blind spot. The AI's calculations are based on precision, but it can't predict what we'll do if we're in the middle of their fleet. Astra hesitated but then nodded. Okay, let's do it. Ray gunned the throttle, sending the ship into a dive. The Dominion ships were closing in fast, their weapon systems primed for the kill. The sound of enemy fire echoed in the cockpit as they streaked past, narrowly dodging the deadly beams. The ship shuddered with every near miss, but Ray held steady, his grip tight on the controls. Astra worked quickly, firing the weapons on their ship with precision, sending blinding bursts of energy into the heart of the enemy's formation. The Dominion fleet was chaotic now, their AI struggling to adapt to the unpredictable, reckless maneuvers Ray was pulling off. They didn't know how to deal with him, didn't know how to anticipate the human instinct for survival that Ray had tapped into. Then it happened. One of the Dominion ships exploded in a ball of fire, debris scattering across the void of space. The others faltered, their formations disrupted, the AI's control over them slipping. Ray didn't waste a second. He dove deeper into the chaos, unleashing the full force of their weapons on the remaining ships. But the battle was far from over. A powerful enemy ship, larger and more heavily armored than the others, broke through the disarray, its massive guns aimed directly at their ship. Astra gasped as the ship's targeting system locked onto them. Ray, they're preparing to fire. Ray's heart pounded in his chest. He didn't have much time. His mind raced as he formulated one last plan. Something desperate, something that could turn the tide. We can't outrun them, Ray said, his voice grim. But we can take them down. Astra's eyes widened with understanding. You want to ram them. Ray nodded, the decision final. It's the only way. He turned the ship directly toward the enormous Dominion warship, aiming for its central core, where the weak points were located. The ship's weapon systems blared as the massive ship prepared to fire, but Ray had already committed. There was no turning back. In the final moments, Ray felt the hum of the ship's engines, the surge of energy as they charged forward. The enemy fire lit up the cockpit, but Ray kept his eyes on the target. He was ready. With Astra's support, they would do the impossible. The moment of impact was inevitable. The explosion shook the very fabric of space, sending shockwaves that rippled through the stars. The Dominion had underestimated humanity's resolve, and it had cost them dearly. As the dust settled, Ray looked to Astra, her face etched with both relief and determination. "We've won this round," she said softly. But Ray knew this wasn't over. The Dominion would come again. But next time, they wouldn't be prepared for the fury of humanity. Ray stood in the command center, his hands trembling slightly as he surveyed the damage on the ship's exterior. They had won a battle, but the victory felt hollow. There was no time to celebrate, no time for relief. The Dominion was relentless, and they would come for them again. "Ray," Astra's voice broke through his thoughts, soft yet firm. "We need to talk." He turned to her, his brow furrowing in concern. Astra had been different ever since the battle. She was quiet, distant, almost like she was carrying a heavy weight. Ray could see the strain in her eyes, but he didn't know what was wrong. Not yet. He nodded, gesturing for her to follow him to the crew's quarters. Once they were alone, Astra closed the door behind her, the silence pressing in on them. Ray could feel the tension in the air, the unspoken words between them. He took a deep breath, trying to calm the storm brewing inside. "What's going on, Astra? You've been off ever since the fight." Astra hesitated, her gaze dropping to the floor. "Ray, there's something you need to know. Something I should have told you before all of this began." Ray's heart sank. He didn't know why, but he could feel the weight of her words before she even spoke them. "What is it?" Astra took a step back, her voice shaky. I'm not who you think I am. I was sent here to spy on you, to use you." Ray felt the floor drop beneath him. His mind refused to process her words, like they couldn't possibly be real. This couldn't be happening. "What are you talking about?" he demanded, the shock clear in his voice. Astra swallowed hard. "I'm a member of the Dominion. I was sent here to learn about your ship, your technology, and to find a way to destroy you from within." Ray stared at her, his heart pounding. The words felt like a slap to the face. Everything he had fought for, everything he had believed about Astra, was a lie. "How could you?" His voice cracked with disbelief. "You've been with me, helping me fight, helping us survive, and all this time, you've been lying." Astra closed her eyes, the guilt written all over her face. "I never wanted to betray you. I never wanted to hurt you, but I had no choice. I was under orders." The betrayal cut deep, sharper than any weapon. Ray had trusted her with his life, and now it felt like she had ripped everything apart. "How could you do this to me? To all of us?" "I didn't want to," Astra said, her voice breaking. "But I had no choice. If I didn't do what they said, they would have killed me, just like they did to so many others." Ray took a step back, his mind swirling. The woman he thought he knew, the one who had stood by his side, was now a traitor. She wasn't just an ally. She was the enemy. He turned away, struggling to contain the anger, the hurt that bubbled up inside him. "You should have told me sooner. You should have trusted me." Astra reached out to him, her hand trembling. "Ray, please. I'm not completely like them. I've seen what the Dominion is capable of. I've seen how they treat people, how they've killed so many innocent lives. I couldn't just stand by and do nothing." Ray clenched his fists, his jaw tight. "But you still chose to betray us. You chose to deceive me. I don't know if I can forgive you for that." The room fell into an uncomfortable silence. Astra stood there, her eyes pleading, but Ray couldn't bring himself to say anything more. Everything he thought he knew about the war, about Astra, had been shattered, and it hurt more than anything he had ever felt before. The days that followed were dark, filled with tension. Ray kept his distance from Astra, his mind constantly replaying their conversation. The betrayal stung, and no matter how much Astra apologized or explained, he couldn't bring himself to trust her again. But the situation didn't allow for anger or personal grudges. The Dominion was still out there, and they weren't going to stop until humanity was destroyed. Ray knew they couldn't afford to lose Astra completely. Her knowledge, her skills, were vital to their survival. And then came the worst news they could have gotten. The Dominion had located their base. They knew where they were hiding, and they were preparing to strike. "We have to leave," Ray said, his voice grim as he stood before the crew, his mind already working out a plan. "They'll come for us soon. We don't have much time." Astra stood at the back of the room, her face pale. Ray couldn't bring himself to look at her. He had no choice but to lead, but every decision was harder than the last. "Where do we go?" one of the crew members asked, panic in his voice. Ray's mind raced, but the options were limited. They couldn't stay here, and they couldn't run forever. Their ship had been damaged, and resources were running low. But there was one place left, an old, abandoned station far out in the outer rim. It was a long shot, but it was their only chance. "We head to the station," Ray said, his voice steady. "We'll make it work. It's our only shot." The crew was silent for a moment, the weight of their situation sinking in. They all knew it was a dangerous move, but it was the only move they had. As the ship made its way to the distant station, the tension between Ray and Astra remained thick. They both knew the stakes, and neither of them was willing to let personal feelings get in the way. But the silence between them was a constant reminder of the rift that had formed. And then, when they arrived at the station, everything seemed to go wrong. The Dominion arrived faster than they anticipated, and they found themselves in a desperate fight for survival. Ray led the charge, but in the chaos, Astra made a decision that sealed her fate. She turned on them. With cold, calculated precision, Astra used her knowledge of their systems against them, leading the Dominion right to their doorstep. Ray watched in horror as the ship's defenses faltered and the enemy breached their position. The betrayal was complete. Astra had sold them out to the Dominion, and in the end, it wasn't just trust that was lost, it was hope. As the battle raged on, Ray knew there was no going back. The pain of her betrayal was overwhelming, but there was no time to mourn. He had to survive, had to fight for those who were still with him. Astra was gone, but Ray's resolve had never been stronger. The fight for humanity wasn't over. It was only just beginning. The chaos of the final battle was nothing like Ray had ever experienced. The crew had fought bravely, but it felt like a losing battle from the start. The Dominion, with their advanced AI technology, had launched a full-scale assault on the station. The air was thick with the scent of burning metal and the sound of alarms echoing through the halls. Ray could barely hear himself think over the roar of explosions, but he knew one thing: they couldn't afford to lose. The battle had reached its peak. The Dominion's forces were closing in, their ships hovering just outside the station, firing relentlessly at the last line of defense. Ray's crew was down to only a handful of survivors, and it seemed like the end was near. He knew they couldn't hold out for much longer. As he surveyed the carnage around him, Ray's mind flashed back to everything that had brought them to this point. The betrayal of Astra, the pain of losing so many good people, and the overwhelming weight of responsibility he had carried throughout it all. But despite everything, there was still hope. He couldn't give up. Not now. Not when they were so close to victory. "Ray, the enemy's closing in." One of the survivors yelled over the comms. "We need to make a final stand." Ray nodded grimly, taking one last look at the damage around them. They had to fight back. They had to win. "Prepare the last line of defense," he said, voice steady despite the desperation in his heart. This is it. We make our stand here. His crew scrambled into position, each person knowing their role in the defense. Ray was no longer just a soldier, he was their leader. He could feel the weight of every decision, but he also knew that they had come this far together, and they weren't about to let the Dominion destroy everything they had fought for. With a deep breath, Ray activated the defense systems. The station's weapons fired back at the Dominion ships, striking their hulls with explosive force. But the Dominion's technology was far superior. For every blast the station's weapons fired, the Dominion retaliated with twice the firepower. The situation seemed hopeless. Then, just when it felt like the last of their defenses was about to fall, a sudden surge of energy ripped through the battlefield. Ray's heart skipped a beat as he looked up and saw a familiar shape, a ship, a human ship, soaring through the chaos. It was the backup force, the reinforcements they had called for days earlier, but they hadn't expected them to arrive in time. Yet, somehow, they had. Ray's hope surged, but the danger was far from over. The reinforcements had arrived just in time to provide some relief, but it wasn't enough to turn the tide on their own. They needed more. And then Ray saw it, the station's main reactor. If they could overload it, they could destroy the Dominion fleet, but it was a gamble, a dangerous one that could cost them everything. "Ray, what's the plan?" one of his remaining soldiers asked, his voice urgent. Ray didn't hesitate. "We overload the reactor. It's our only shot at taking down their fleet. Get to the core, now." The crew raced toward the station's reactor room, dodging explosions and avoiding the Dominion's advancing forces. Time was running out. Every step felt like an eternity, and Ray's heart raced as he pushed himself and his crew forward. The reactor core was deep within the station, a massive structure that hummed with the energy that powered their entire base. It was heavily guarded, but Ray's team was ready. They fought their way through the Dominion soldiers with precision, each move calculated and focused. Finally, they reached the reactor room. The entrance was sealed, but Ray wasn't going to let anything stop them. He activated the override sequence and kicked the door open. Inside, the reactor pulsed with raw power, glowing brightly with the promise of destruction. "Set the charges," Ray ordered. "We're making this station our final stand." The crew worked quickly, placing explosive charges around the core. The Dominion would soon realize what they were up to, and when they did, they would stop at nothing to prevent the detonation. Ray knew they didn't have much time. The countdown began. 30 seconds, Ray muttered, his hand shaking as he activated the final sequence. But as the countdown echoed in the room, something unexpected happened. Astra appeared, her face a mask of determination and regret. She stood in the doorway, blocking the exit with a force field. "Ray, wait," she shouted, her voice filled with desperation. "Don't do this." Ray turned to face her, his heart pounding in his chest. "Why are you here, Astra? After everything you've done." Astra's eyes were wide with guilt. "I didn't want this. I didn't want to betray you. But I couldn't stop them. The Dominion, they forced me to help them." Ray felt a mixture of anger and confusion flood through him. "And now you want to stop me from saving everyone. I didn't know what they were capable of." Astra pleaded. "I thought I could change things, but it's too late. The Dominion's AI is more advanced than we realized. If you overload the reactor, it won't just destroy them. It'll destroy everything. The station, the ship, all of us. There's no way out." Ray's mind raced as he processed her words. Could she be right? Was it really too late? But in his heart, he knew the Dominion couldn't be allowed to win. He couldn't let Astra's betrayal define their fate. "Ray, please." Astra's voice softened, almost pleading. "I know I failed you, but I can help you. Together, we can find another way." Ray looked into her eyes. He didn't know what to believe anymore. But the danger was too great. The reactor was already on the brink of overload, and there was no turning back. Without another word, Ray made his decision. He turned toward the console and initiated the final sequence. "Goodbye, Astra," he said quietly. "I hope you find redemption." As he made his way to the heart of the station's defense systems, Ray couldn't help but think of all the faces he had lost along the way. Bonner, Jack, Erica. Their sacrifices had brought them to this point. But it was his turn now. The AI was relentless, and he had to end it, no matter the cost. Reaching the control room, Ray accessed the central console. His fingers flew over the controls, his heart pounding as the countdown to the final showdown began. The AI's forces were closing in, and Ray could feel their presence creeping closer by the second. He needed to act fast. The control room was eerily quiet, the only sound the rapid beeping of the countdown timer. Ray knew that once he activated the final protocol, there would be no turning back. The station would be destroyed, and he would likely be caught in the blast. His mind flashed to the faces of his crew, the soldiers who had fought beside him. He thought of Astra, too, the woman who had once betrayed them but had ultimately fought alongside them in the end. She had tried to redeem herself, but the cost had been too high. Ray's finger hovered over the final command. He didn't want to die, but he knew this was the only way to ensure that humanity's victory wasn't in vain. The station would be destroyed, but the AI's core would be obliterated with it, preventing it from ever rising again. With one last, steady breath, Ray pressed the button. The explosion that followed was unlike any other. The station's core ruptured in a brilliant flash of light, sending waves of energy throughout the entire facility. Ray could feel the heat even from where he stood, but he didn't flinch. He had made his choice. This was the only way to end it. As the station's lights flickered and the walls around him began to crumble, Ray thought of his crew, his friends. They would survive. They would carry the legacy of their victory, of their sacrifice. And when they told the story of what had happened here, they would remember Ray Calloway, the man who had made the ultimate sacrifice for humanity's survival. The light of the explosion enveloped him, and Ray finally let go. And just like that, the AI's reign was over. Humanity had won.